Welcome to day 2 of Work 22, our virtual symposium to help leaders anticipate the challenges they'll face in the year ahead. I'm Abby Lundberg, Editor-in-Chief of MIT Sloan Management Review, and I'll be moderating the event along with my colleague, Executive Editor Elizabeth Heichler. Yesterday, we explored how to manage in an era of employee activism, what it takes to create a culture of inclusion and belonging in a hybrid workplace, and how to lead agile, high-functioning, collaborative teams. Now, while many of our speakers are leading academic researchers, we're going to kick off today hearing from someone on the front lines of putting these ideas into practice. Doug Palladini is Global Brand President of Vans. A veteran of the action sports industry, Doug oversees the strategic direction of Vans' more than $4 billion global business. Since joining in 2004, he's played a central role in the company's transformation into a global icon of creative expression and youth culture, and the largest action sports footwear and apparel brand on the planet. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
So, like a lot of companies, Vans had to be flexible with its workforce during the pandemic. To what extent will you continue to enable flexibility in where and how people work, and why are you making those decisions?
These changes are permanent, Abby. We're not going back. I think the new reality is very much based on flexibility. And for Vans, it's all about listening to our employee base. We call them our Vans family. It's about understanding the whole employee, not just the part that's at work. And what we're hearing very loud and clear is they need more flexibility in their lives. People are really enjoying taking their kids to school, being able to do that, being home at lunch, being able to exercise when they feel like it, and still doing a great job at work. I don't think it has anything to do with efficiency, getting work done. I think it's about leaning into the whole person, not just the employee part, to say.
So what does that flexibility look like? To what extent and does it vary from different types of employees? What kinds of jobs they hold? What will that look like?
Yeah, it absolutely does. It does depend on what job you're doing. If you're in product design and development, you have to be here to work with the physical product. And the people who do those jobs understand that, and they want to be here to review the prototypes, as an example. If you're a coder, a programmer, if you're building digital creative for our business, you probably don't have to be in the office very much. So I think it's more specificity on the type of role that's going to determine how much flexibility there is. There's no reason anymore for us to sort of paint everything with the same picture. It's really being adaptable to the type of job and understanding what that requires going forward.
Is that a manager challenge? Given how big Vans is and you're spread out all over the world, you have managers working with different employees in different locations. How are you communicating that, and how are the policies being set for how that works out?
It's about empowering our managers to make those decisions, Abby. And then it's about being strategic about when we need to be together. Where is that physical presence truly adding value? If you're coming in the office and at the end of the day, all you've done has been on Zoom and on your Slack channel, you probably didn't need to be here that day. So why is that imperative? There are other days, there are cultural moments at Vans where it's important for us all to be together. And we want to encourage people to be there for those things. I think it's about, again, that specificity, being more tactical, being more strategic about where being together is going to add the most value. And we're going to rely on our managers to make those decisions.
What kinds of enablers are you providing people to be able to do that kind of seamlessly, depending on where they are? And also, I'm really curious to know, how are you setting those days in the office? Like, is there a schedule for that? Do you do that sort of on an ad hoc basis?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is I'm not paid to promote Slack, but I'm a big fan of it. And I'm a big fan of the premise of asynchronous collaboration. We run a business that is live in 100 countries around the world, and asking everyone to be in the same place at the same time, that meeting mentality, that meeting as the sort of default central way that business gets done is very old school and I think needs to go away. It's too difficult, and we have people in China up on calls with us at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's not conducive to saying you're a people company and you care about your people, right? So asynchronous collaboration has got to be modus operandi as we move forward. There's no doubt about that. Again, when we do really have to be together, we're going to be much more specific about those times, and there's going to be a darn good reason why. Um, we want people to want to be in the office, not have to be. There's a meaningful difference there, right? So we're going to try to create an atmosphere in all of our buildings all over the world where people want to be there during the right times and feel good about having meetings there. If you have someone coming in from the outside, if you're entertaining media or VIPs like you, Abby, I want you to come see the office. And I'm going to be here. I'm going to be here because I'm very proud of our office and what it says about our brand. But again, those are going to be specific times where it's strategic for us to be face to face.
So there are a lot of challenges with managing a remote or a hybrid workforce. And as a global company, you've had some of those experiences even before the pandemic. But I'm curious to know, given the scope and the scale of that working from home, over the past couple of years, what have you found to be a bigger challenge? Is it more of a challenge to sort of ensure that people are be able to work efficiently and effectively, or is it more of a challenge to really be able to manage people's well-being?
I don't think it has to do with productivity whatsoever. That's been our experience. What I would tell you is prior to the pandemic, the office, the feeling of our culture was effusive. You come here, it's palpable. You can feel the energy of our culture when you're in the office. When you're on Zoom, you cannot. You just can't. It's not the same thing, and that's been the biggest loss. And now, as we have this great reshuffling, right? What you're seeing is, well, I don't feel the culture as much. I'm on sitting here on Zoom in my guest room anyway. Maybe I will take the call from this recruiter. Whereas in the past, you're like, no, I'm good. I really like it here. So that's the biggest impact that we are seeing is a feeling of separation from our culture. And our culture is how we show up when we're all together. You just can't, there is no one-to-one recreation of that in the Zoom world.
So what kinds of things are you doing to try to, bridge that gap with that remoteness, both with culture and just the checking in with people?
Mm-hmm. Well, there are several things. It goes back to what I said about recognizing the entire person, not just the employee part. And I'll give you some specific examples. We as leaders, we've made it a practice to never begin a conversation without making it personal. And instead of diving right into what has to be done or the status of this project, we just need to breathe and take a few minutes to say, how is your family? How are you? How are your children? What happened with this thing I know you had going on? How was your vacation? Whatever it is, we just need to breathe for a minute and recognize the human part of who we are. The other thing I think that's a really good clue for people is one-to-one recognition of great performance. And I'll give you a good example. Um, we have a great employee who did exceptional work on a project, and she is training for a marathon. And so we arranged for a masseuse to come to her house and get a 2 hour massage because she's so sore from all this training. So what we're saying is thank you for the great work, but we also recognize that you are doing these other things that are really cool, like training for a marathon, and we want to recognize you in that way. So we think that increases what we call the feels, the scientific word, the feels. And so it really recognizes that person on a very human level, and we love that. They're not expensive things. We had an IT guy who did a great job. We sent a car detailer to his house to detail his car.
Nice.
And so it could be a pizza, it could be a car detail, it could be a massage, but it's just recognition of these people and the work that they're doing, and then who they are outside of their job. And I think that's a great way to just say thank you.
Now you have a very distinctive culture in your company as a brand with just what you sell and how you engage with your customers. I'm curious to know sort of how much that it sort of infuses the entire organization internally, and then how are you helping to sort of build that part of the culture as you onboard new employees and as people come in who may not have been part of the Vans family for a long time?
Well, pre-pandemic, it was a heck of a lot easier, of course. We have a really amazing thing called the Van Doren Project. Van Doren is the name of the founding family of Vans. And what we would do is we would bring new employees together once a year at our headquarters here for a 4-day cultural immersion that was education, inspiration, and entertainment. And they would get to meet people, they'd get to meet each other, they'd get to understand what our culture is really all about, what our purpose of enabling creative expression is really all about. And then they would go home as ambassadors of that culture, no matter which country they were coming from. We can't do that anymore. So what we're having to really do is rely on those sort of what I'll call microclimates. So we have a great team in Kuala Lumpur. They have to get together and do those cultural moments virtually now. We have a great team in Montreal. They have to get together and do a Montreal version of that cultural immersion now. So it's about sort of breaking down those opportunities that used to exist through this, through this beacon that's in Costa Mesa, California, right? And sort of create again these microclimates of our culture that can happen much more closer to the employee than we were able to before. And really look forward to obviously getting back to inviting everybody back to our global headquarters as soon as possible.
I'm sure. Now, I want to shift gears a little bit. You've made a big and very public commitment to improving diversity, equity, and inclusion. Tell us a little
Mhm.
bit about how that got started and what are some of the things that you're doing?
We've been doing things for a long time, but our cause sort of came together when George Floyd was murdered, and it's so upsetting that it took a specific person's death to sort of codify our social justice cause at Vans. But that is the reality of what happened, and we've tried to use that really sad, horrific event as a springboard for what we intend to do going forward. Our first step, Abby, was to look inside, to look at ourselves, and to honestly assess what we have done, which what we heard very clearly was not enough. And so what we set out to do was create internal goals that could be public facing in terms of how we become more diverse and inclusive as a brand. That means we've actually published our goals to become more diverse. And that's in our employee base, that's our athletes, that's the vendors that we work with throughout our organization, from an assistant or an administrator all the way up to my job, to be as inclusive as possible. And I'm proud to say that in many cases, goals that we set for 2025 have already been achieved, and now we're going to re-up. Then the next step was to look at our community. Orange County, California, not exactly known as a beacon of diversity and inclusiveness, but that's where we're from. For 55 years, we've been based in Orange County. So we are working inside the county to understand what we can do, bringing businesses together to say, let's work together to amplify a more visible and meaningful way to bring in a diverse culture. And then honestly, Abby, from there, it's try to extend that message out globally and say, who are the people out in the world that are doing great work that we can help support? And if you look on our website, if you look at our content, you'll see artists, musicians, groups that we are supporting as well. So it's starting in the center, looking inside of our culture and honestly assessing our opportunity, and then each concentric circle out from there.
And I love, because you do have such a great brand and such a strong, sort of dedicated following that you're using that to amplify other people's voices and using your network to do that. That's terrific.
A very important point. We don't have to start everything ourselves. We need to look around and see who else is doing great things that we can just shine a light on, right? And use our light, use our speaker, our microphone to shine a light on other good things that are happening in the world. And we're so fortunate to have an extended family of creators that are doing incredible work. And these are people from every ethnicity, every sexuality, and we support all of them.
That's terrific. Um, but on the other hand, not everyone in the U.S. has embraced the Black Lives Matter movement. Sorry.
Mhm.
Um, have you had any pushback from customers, and how have you responded to that?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. We're certainly not ubiquitous, but we're a fairly well-known global brand at this point. And when we took the decision to say that Black Lives Matter, which by the way we think is a pretty darn low bar, Black lives more than just matter. And it's not just Black lives, it's every ethnicity, every race, every culture, like I said, every sexuality. Those all matter to us. We knew that there were going to be people who had been fans that were not going to agree with that commitment, and we're going to look elsewhere for a brand to support. And honestly, Abby, we're good with that. Sure, we got the Instagram videos of people throwing their vans in trash cans and saying that all lives matter, for example. Um, and I didn't see one of those that made me regret the decision that we had made. I think if you are trying to be in this day and age all things to all people, and you are unwilling to stand for what you believe in and make people understand who you are and who you are not, that you're at greater peril than ever before. I think our fans, our potential fans on this planet, expect to support brands where there's a clear understanding of what we stand for. So that concept that we're just going to sit on the sidelines and keep our mouth shut, I think that day has passed, and I think the brands have chosen to do that, are finding life much more difficult as a result.
I think that's got to be a hard thing when you have customers who are saying no to something to stand true to your commitment and go forward. One of our speakers yesterday talked about leading a company in an era of employee activism, and what I loved about what she said was you don't have to take up every cause, but you have to make choices, and you have to actually commit to those and follow through.
Yeah, I think you have to listen as well, right? Look what just happened with Netflix with the Dave Chappelle special is a very good example. It's not that Netflix had to take down the video. It's that the leadership had to listen to their employees and understand the pain that content was causing, and be empathetic and listen and try to understand. We cannot take up every cause. That's very, very true. I really agree with that. But we have to listen, and you have to understand what's impacting our Vans family. You can't just act authoritatively and sort of turn a blind eye to what your employees are trying to tell you anymore.
Yeah, we've got some great questions coming in from the audience, and I want to make sure we get to some of those.
Sure.
So this one is, what are the employee and management skills that you think will enable discontinuous collaboration? What do people need to do differently?
Well, the first thing I already mentioned, you have to take the meeting out as the default way that business gets done, right? So when you're ready to plan a meeting because you need an update on X, Y, and Z, don't resist the urge. Think about a different way to get what you need without having to have everybody in the same room at the same time. Again, I feel that that's quite antiquated. We have to embrace asynchronous collaboration. We've just gone through a very arduous and significant contract negotiation without having a meeting. And I think that's proof that it can be done. And in a lot of ways, it's ratcheted up the level of communication because we created a channel in Slack, and you have everything you need right there. If you forgot one point, you can go back and look at the documents. It's adaptability to new ways of working that are super, super critical. The other thing that we're doing, Abby, that I would really encourage people to do is think much more about cross-functional platforms for work. Okay. Instead of every function having its role and then tossing the work to the next function and then the next function, think about starting teams, cross-functional teams, off on that work from the very outset and having them flow through the entire process together. Organizationally, they can still stay connected to their function or their region, but they can work together as a cohesive unit from the beginning to the end of a project or a product that's being launched or whatever. And we're finding much greater job satisfaction when they're part of these cross-functional streams from the outset. So I think that sort of the unsiloing of the way that we work is another very critical aspect. And we're looking at all different kinds of work. Another one that I love, Abby, just real quickly, is we have agile working teams. When we have to get after a problem, when we have to get after a big opportunity, we assemble a small group, cross-functional group. We take them out of their jobs, and for 2 weeks, they do nothing but get after this issue or opportunity, come back and present their solution. And then once we enact whatever part of the solution we're going to enact, then they go back to their day jobs. But I can't tell you the amount of satisfaction and fulfillment that our people are getting. And now people are fighting to get into those agile working team opportunities as they arise, because it's such a fun and engaging way to use your skills. And so we have to get beyond our job descriptions, I think is a good way to put it.
So that's so interesting. And as you're taking down these silos and working more asynchronously, as people are working in this more hybrid model, um, are you having to adapt the performance management system or any of your other sort of structures to support this new way of working?
Yeah, and I'll give you a great example. We used to not recognize volunteer work as part of your goals and objectives for the year and or your performance evaluation. So we have people spending hours and hours a week working in our employee resource groups, for example, and doing really great, meaningful work that's making our culture stronger. And we've built their performance in those employee resource groups into their performance plans, and they're being great. Their performances are being graded now, not again beyond the job description, right? Not just the day job, but these other things that are contributing to our culture are now part of their performance evaluation. And what that is doing is that, guess what? It's encouraging more volunteerism. It's encouraging people to think more about supporting our brand in its entirety, not just based on the job description that you have. So you're going to focus on what you are measured by. That's a human reality. And we need to broaden the aperture on the lens of what people are measured by in our environment. And I think that creates a strong cultural shift. And we've seen that to be a very positive benefit.
Yeah, I was going to say that that definitely would feed back into building the kind of culture that you want. Um, you guys have a very large contingent workforce when you think about, the athletes who are part of your brand, and then the people that are behind the camera. To what extent do you include them in your thinking about the workforce and your DEI strategies and all of your workforce strategies?
100%. So our Vans family are our full-time employees, and then our extended Vans family are literally hundreds of creators around the world that work for us. That could be a photographer, that could be a band, that could be a skateboarder. Those are all part of our extended family. And our work arrangement may be different. They may be a contractor, or they may be on a short-term project for us, but we treat them as part of our family. And by the way, specifically to DEI, when you look at our goals that are published, you'll see that our athletes, the people behind the camera, the models that you see on our website wearing our product, all of those are considered in our diversity and inclusion objectives, Abby. It's so important that our fans want to see themselves in our brand in every way, in every way. And so if you are African American, if you're Native American, part of the indigenous population, and you look at our website and it's a bunch of white guys, there's going to be a disconnect there. You want to see yourself in our brand. So if you look at the stories we tell, if you look at our content, if you look at our athlete base, what you'll see is a diversity of ethnicity, of sexuality, of gender. All those things are very important, whether you're in front of the camera or behind it.
Thank you. So this question goes back to what you were talking about in terms of building those, you call them microclimates. And the question is, how do the microclimates differ from one locality to another? How do you ensure the key parts of the Van Dorn project are honored while still allowing local flair?
That's a really good question. Thank you. One of my mottos is global consistency with local relevancy, and that is what we practice. So there are things that cannot change, no matter where in the world you are. We only have one purpose. Our purpose is to enable creative expression. We only have one muse. Our muse is called the expressive creator. So there are certain parts of our brand identity, of our purpose, of our culture that are just locked. Those are the tablets that are chiseled in stone, Abby. There are other parts that need to be much more malleable. If you're in Shanghai, there's going to be specificity to things that are important to our Chinese team that are different than the team in Chile, different than the team in Canada. We need to be respectful of the local culture as well, and understand what we can all learn and benefit from that incredible diversity that we have. Not say, nope, there's only one way we show up. This isn't the authoritarian command and control culture. No, we need to be very clear about the things that must remain consistent and then allow for that flexibility in each region. When you run an ad in Hong Kong and it's not in Cantonese, you run the risk of saying, we have no clue who you are. And we don't want to do that, right? So it can be something that simple. It can be something very complex and very specific to a city or a country that we need to be aware of. And we're really fortunate to have great employees all over the world who understand that. And we give them the space to be able to sort of transcreate what we provide globally and make that relevant in their specific community. Again, at the end of the day, Abby, you want to see yourself in our brand. That's where the emotional connectivity comes from.
We just have a minute left, and I just wanted to ask you, um, you know, given everything that you're trying to do right now, and I'm curious to know, what do you see as your main role in driving those changes and that continuity? Um, you're obviously a very articulate speaker, and I'm sure that that's a lot of what you do. But how much do you spend with those local and those microclimates, and how do you allocate your time?
Yeah, the first thing I would tell you is the commitments we've talked about today have to start at the top. I can't be apart from all the things I've just talked about. So I have to lead by example, literally and figuratively. The second thing is actions over words. We have to say what we intend to do, and then we have to do it. When you talk about the greenwashing, when you talk about signaling, what those things are means you're talking about it and you don't mean it. Sincerity is so critical here. And the way that we sort of prove out our sincerity and are held accountable to it is through actions. So when we say we intend to do these things to be more diverse and inclusive, we then have to prove every single day that we are acting against those things. And I have to do that as well. And then the third thing I would say is human connectivity. Remember, we were talking about what's changed in the way we communicate. I have to bring that. And I do town halls with our regions all over the world. And I just talk to people and we get on Zoom and there's 500 people from our Stabio office, which is in Switzerland, representing our Europe, Middle East and Africa family. And we just talk about what's going on in Israel today, what's going on in Italy today. And I just try to hear from them and I try to listen. And you don't have to have all the answers. And my God, I certainly don't. So you bring a dose of humility, but you act with empathy, and you show up and you be there and you listen, and you take on board what your teams are trying to tell you. Having all the answers is not what is expected of your employees. Listening to them, being empathetic to what they're going through in their worlds, in their microclimates, that is what's expected. And that's what I endeavor to do every 24 hours.
Fantastic. Doug, thank you so much. So many great insights and examples. Really appreciate your spending time with us today.
Enjoyed it. Thank you for having me, Abby.
All right, take care. So Elizabeth Heikler, our executive editor, will introduce our next speaker.
The tsunami of resignations and difficulty hiring that has hit many industries lately leads to an urgent question. How can organizational leaders create better, more desirable jobs? Our next speaker, Zeynep Ton, is a professor of the practice at the MIT Sloan School of Management. She is on a mission to develop and share knowledge on how companies can profitably offer good jobs. That's jobs with living wages, stable schedules, meaning, and dignity. She is president of the nonprofit Good Jobs Institute and the author of The Good Jobs Strategy, How the Smartest Companies Invest in Employees to Lower Costs and Boost Profits. Zeynep, thank you for joining us today.
It's great to be here with this group. I'm going to start the presentation with a puzzle. And the puzzle goes like this. Most leaders, most company leaders would rather offer good jobs than bad jobs. I haven't yet met a CEO or an executive who takes pride in providing poverty level wages or inhumane working conditions. So most leaders would rather offer good jobs than bad jobs. There's a ton of evidence, academic evidence, case studies that show that good jobs are actually good for companies. They are profit maximizing. But, and here is where the puzzle comes in, millions of people are stuck in bad jobs. So much so that, as Elizabeth mentioned, the great resignation, there are lots of businesses that are not able to find workers. They're just so fed up with the jobs even before the pandemic. So I want to uncover this puzzle with you during the next 20 minutes. And as I look into why do we have this? Why is it that we have so many bad jobs in the United States when most leaders would rather offer good jobs and when there is evidence that good jobs are good for companies? There are 4 different answers, and I'm going to focus on the first 2 during the next 20 minutes. The first one is, I think I've been talking to a lot of leaders during the last couple of years, and one of the issues is that there's lack of awareness about how bad things have been for workers and how bad things have been for companies' operations. And sometimes even when there is awareness, there's lack of conviction. Yes, there may be theories or case studies that good jobs are good for companies, but some leaders just don't believe that this would work in their organization. And then the third one, even for leaders who are aware and who have conviction that good jobs would work with their companies, they sometimes lack courage because they wonder, we're already profitable. Will our investors let us do this? Or will our board let us do this? And what would it take? And the final thing is that they have lots of questions. What does it take to implement a good job system? So I can't cover all 4 with you today, but I'm going to focus on the first 2. And I hope you leave this presentation having more awareness of how bad things might have been for people in your company and your operations, and some conviction that good jobs could work in pretty much any setting. Here are a couple quotes that I've heard from lots of different people. We already pay above market wages or above market wages, or our engagement scores are so high, 90% of the people take pride in what they do, or 85% of the people think that wages are fair. But then we have high employee turnover. What is going on? Why are people leaving us? This is something I hear over and over again. And what I have found was that one of the biggest drivers of employee turnover, if you operate in a setting with high employee turnover, is that basic needs of a lot of employees are just not met. Decades ago, Herzberg called about these hygiene factors for job motivation. And the hygiene factors are there. They cause dissatisfaction. Their absence causes dissatisfaction, but their presence doesn't really cause satisfaction. So we know that what drives satisfaction, what drives engagement is what Doug talked about before, right? A sense of recognition. Am I recognized for the good work that I do? Do I feel a sense of belonging, meaningfulness of the job, achievement, etc.? But for so many Americans, even their basic needs are not met. And setting over setting over setting, what we find is that if you can't meet basic needs of people, which is provide decent wages that enable them to live a good life, schedules that enable them to take care of their families or go to school and manage their life, career path to a higher level job and safety and security, if these are absent, no amount of higher needs will reduce turnover. And let me show you some data. Even before the pandemic, and I want to focus on before the pandemic just to show how long this problem has been with us and how persistent it has been. Even before the pandemic, 40% of Americans could not absorb $400 of unexpected expense. And 46.5 million Americans worked in jobs where the median wage was less than $15 an hour. Now you might be thinking, $15 an hour, that seems like a good salary, good wage rate. But think about this. Even if you work 40 hours a week, every single week, $15 an hour comes to $31,200 a year. And that amount, and by the way, if you're in a service industry, most workers don't get to work 40 hours a week every single week, and they have very unpredictable schedules. That's another driver of turnover. But even that $31,000 is not a living wage. It's not a subsistence wage for most families across the country. And I'll show you data from one company, and I could show you data from lots of different frontline companies, but this is just one. It's a restaurant chain that we recently worked with. And when I say we, it's our nonprofit Good Jobs Institute. And this restaurant chain, like other companies, were saying, why don't people want to work here? And why can't we hold on to people? When we analyze the pay levels at the organization, and pay again is both their wage rate times the number of hours, what we found out was a huge chunk of full-time employees made below the subsistence wage. So if you look at this chart, 23% of the hosts made a living wage or subsistence wage, and the remaining did not. Only 16% of the dishwashers made enough money for subsistence levels. So this is a common thing across lots of service settings. Invariably, when there's low pay, there's high turnover. And high turnover costs, those of you who have quantified this in your organizations, high turnover almost guarantee, low pay almost guarantees high turnover, and high turnover costs alone, just the direct cost can be high. I won't go through the data here, but what we have found at a call center, for example, was their turnover cost, the direct costs were 45% of their entire payroll. So just the direct cost of turnover can be very high for so many organizations. But when the pay is low, it's not just turnover, it's not just inability to attract talent. You also end up affecting the ability of people. For a long time, we thought about market wages, and we thought, when you pay market wages, the assumption is that each unit of labor that we, think about in the market is the same. But there's a ton of research that shows that when pay levels are below subsistence, then you end up affecting the quality of the labor and employees' ability to contribute. And many employees end up living in a vicious cycle of poverty. So the vicious cycle of poverty, and I apologize, I realize that some of the words don't show with my video, but the vicious cycle of poverty starts like this for employees. They have low pay, not enough to meet their obligations, and then that results in stress, in health issues, in even lower cognitive ability. There's research that shows that low pay drops your IQ by 13 points. It's equivalent to losing several hours of sleep. So when people can't meet their obligations, then they have all these physical, mental, and cognitive health issues. And of course, that reduces their ability to do a good job. They have more attendance problems. They can't focus on the job. They can't be productive. And when that happens, they can't move up in the organization. And then this low pay continues, and this worker still stays in the vicious cycle. I love that so many companies are now offering college tuition reimbursement for their employees. But if you are in this vicious cycle and you're working multiple jobs and can't make ends, it's very hard to think about and have time to be able to do schoolwork on the side and live purposely. The thing is, this is not just expensive for people, right? It's not just bad for workers. What I found in my research, starting more than 20 years ago, is that when companies pay so little, when they don't invest in their workers, they also operate in a vicious cycle of poor performance. So most companies, and of course we talk about how employees are, source of they are an asset, they are most important assets, but employees don't show up in your balance sheet. They oftentimes show up, they show up in your balance sheet and in your income statement. And a lot of companies see their employees as just a cost to be minimized. And when you have this low employee investment, then there's high turnover, lots of understaffing problems, low ability, and that leads to operational problems that I've studied in my research for many years. Happy to answer questions about that if you have them. And then when there are operational problems, sales and profits are lower, and then this vicious cycle continues for companies as well. And this vicious cycle alone is expensive, but what ends up happening is that when companies operate in a vicious cycle, then the unit managers in these companies are constantly fighting fires. They have no time to hire the right people because there are operational problems, there are attendance problems, there are turnover problems. You're constantly looking to hire new people. And oftentimes when people don't show up, you end up doing the work yourself because you just have to get all the work done in the environment. So managers in these environments get a ton of burnout, and they have no time to hire the right people. They have no time to develop people. They have no time to train them. And of course, when you can't hire the right people, when you don't have enough time to train them well, when you can't develop them well, it's very hard to trust them to make decisions. So organizations that operate in this vicious cycle oftentimes take away so many decision rights from the front lines and centralize as much as possible. There are so many rules, there are so many processes, and people really see themselves as interchangeable parts because they're not allowed to make decisions, and there's so much control over everything that they do. In this environment, it's very hard to hold on to good managers because they have the burnout and they leave. And in this environment also, it's not worth doing continuous improvement because people have been there for just a few months or very short amount of time. You don't really have the resources to be able to hear their ideas and act on them. So these are all the things: ability to hire and train the people, ability to empower them, creating trust, having good managers. These are all the things that you can't do if you operate with high employee turnover. And one of the biggest consequences of this, and I will never forget this one worker that I interviewed a couple of years ago, and she said to me, she was talking about her work, and she said to me, "We are throwaways who are a dime a dozen, just human robots, really." And during the pandemic, we've seen how inhumane some workplaces can become over time. And we've seen that how essential workers, people who we call essential workers, because the job that they do is so essential to the functioning of our economy, work in these inhumane conditions and don't even make subsistence wages. So you might say, okay, this is all good. Yes, my company might be in a vicious cycle. I understand all the things with the workers, but we're profitable. And my one question is, profitable, but at what cost? Oftentimes I think about the financial case for good jobs, but also competitive and moral case. The George Floyd's brutal death and the social, racial injustice that we've been talking about has been in the front lines for a long time. And as MLK told us, over and over again, economic and racial injustice are actually inextricably linked. We can't really separate them. So at what price, from a moral perspective, if you're not providing economic security for workers and also at what price from a competitive perspective. Because what I have found in my research is that when companies don't invest in their workers, then it's very difficult to create a compelling reason for their customers to buy from them. Or it's very difficult to adapt to different changes. And I think COVID and the labor shortages is making that competitiveness argument, at least in the eyes of workers, very obvious for us. So you might now be have more awareness about how bad things may be for your workers and how bad things may be for the company. But you might also be thinking, and I've seen a lot of executives who have told me, we've raised wages before. We've empowered our employees before, but it didn't work. It didn't work in terms of, we didn't see a huge benefit in terms of performance. So what are you talking about? And I'm going to get to the conviction now. So I will start with a company that performs and operates very differently, Quick Trip, which is a convenience store chain with gas stations. So this is a pamphlet from Quick Trip from a couple of years ago, from 2019, and this is when they were, what they were giving to prospective employees, and full-timers would make $42,400. Again, this is a convenience store chain with gas stations. And just to remind you, the median wage in retail at this time was about $12 an hour. And Quick Trip promotes 100% from within, so they create that career path for their employees, and their employee turnover is 13%, way below the industry average, which is over 100%. And it's an outlier in terms of performance. In fact, the year that I studied them, their per store performance, per store profits were 89% higher than not the average in their industry, but the top quartile in their industry. A second example of a company that operates very differently is Costco. Here is my favorite meat manager from Costco. His name is Todd Miner, and he talks about how Costco will give you a salary when you can raise a family, a medical plan where expenses will be covered if you have a sick child, and that keeps that employee focus and their mind on the job. But the thing is, when you look at an outlier in terms of performance like Costco or like Quick Trip or Trader Joe's or Mercadona, a Spanish supermarket chain, or Southwest Airlines or Toyota, I can name so many different companies, they don't just invest in people. And in fact, it's not just about higher wages. These companies, on the one hand, invest so much in their people, but on the other hand, they also design their operations very different than their competitors do. And in fact, the operational decisions that they make ensure a very high return on their people investment. And those same operational decisions also require a very capable and motivated workforce, and that's why high labor investment is actually worthy for them. So in my research, I found 4 operational choices that were common across these companies. The first one is they were very clear. This is strategic focus and operational simplification. They had clarity about what they offered their customers and what they didn't offer their customers. And then they simplified their operations consistent with that focus, and that simplification enabled their employees to be a lot more productive. For example, if you go to a Mercadona store, you will see a lot fewer products than a typical supermarket chain. Those of you who are Trader Joe's customers, I'm sure have experienced this, right? Trader Joe's has fewer products than the competitors, but what the fewer products enable them to do, this way their employees are faster, they can respond to customer needs, they can be advocates for customers, they know about the products, and that way they are more productive, they can create more value for the company, and as a result, Trader Joe's can pay them more. So focus and simplify is one of the operational choices that I've seen that was coming across these companies. And then the other choices were, on the one hand, these companies standardize their processes, standardize some of their labor practice, some of their management practices, but they combine that standardization with empowerment. In fact, they standardize in order to empower, not standardize to control their people. A third choice that was coming across them was cross-train employees to do multiple tasks so they can be productive, so they can respond to customer needs. And the final operational choice, which is my favorite operational choice, which I'm sure so many of you will be nodding your heads because it will resonate given what's happening right now, is these companies operate with swag. they have more labor hours. They staff their units with more labor hours than the expected workload. They always try to have more people than they need. Why? Because in their eyes, customers are the first, and they want to create value for the customer. And in addition to customer first, they want to make sure that their employees have a sense of achievement because they can do a good job. They can create value for their customers. And by the way, when they need to take time off, they can take time off because they won't let their team down if they're sick or if they're not able to come to work that day. So I'll stop here and see, this is the good job system that I talk about. And what I will say is, and I hope you can see how system might work. It might be overwhelming sometimes to see, oh my God, this is an entire system and my organization doesn't have so many elements of this. But what I have seen in practice is that during the last couple of years, several companies started adopting this system, and the benefits for them have been not just financial, but also competitive, because now they're able to differentiate themselves in the eyes of their customers. And it's also been moral, because no leader would not do the right thing and pay poverty level wages to their employees or not offer great working conditions. So I'll stop here and see what questions you have for me.
Thank you so much, Zainab. I know that you've got so much more that you could talk about. You've got really fascinating work. So we have some good questions in from the audience and time to take a few of them. So, but first I'd like to start with, you focused on the need to create awareness and conviction. What's the first step you recommend for doing that? And who are the people that you need to build that with?
Great. So I will say first, Elizabeth, to have conviction, you have to believe in people. Believe in people in terms of believe in the ordinary people's ability to perform well and do a good job. And this sounds so easy, but one of the questions that I oftentimes get from audiences, well, are most people worthy of $15 an hour? Or we already pay market wages for people who don't have many skills. So leaders who have been able to implement this good job system first, had deep conviction that ordinary people could do extraordinary things. So I'll give you one example from John Furner, who is now the US CEO of Walmart. And he raised wages for Sam's Club's frontline workers $5 to $7 an hour, $5 to $7 an hour from a base of $15 an hour at the time, and made lots of operational decisions as well. But key to that was that he worked in the front lines himself before. And he said to us, he said, I had such a belief in the team that was in the field. People who work in fulfillment centers, they cut meat, they bake bread, they run registers. I had so much belief in them that if we could take a bet on them, then they would do everything to make it work for us. And for most people, I would say that, I hope you have that belief. And if you don't, because if you operate in a vicious cycle, you might think that people don't want to do a good job because you see attendance problems, you see turnover problems, but that's a function of the system versus the job itself. And the other thing that I would recommend people to do is do a pay analysis. Look at your frontline employees and look at full-timers and examine what percentage of them are making a subsistence wage. And do it by race and gender, right? Because especially if you're doing any efforts around DEI, do this analysis and also look at internal promotion. Are you promoting from within? And do that by race and gender as well. So the more we look at data to create awareness, the better.
Thank you. And as you point out, and just as you were concluding, a really important component of your good job system is operate with Slack. And that's a big challenge for a lot of companies. So among those companies that you've looked at that have made progress in creating good jobs, how have they managed to build more Slack into their operations?
I think the best way to operate with Slack is to first start with focus and simplify and say, what are we doing that doesn't add value to our customer that we can stop doing? Because one way to operate with Slack is just add more labor hours, right? But another way to create that Slack is remove all the non-essentials from the place of employees. Part of it is strategic, What do we do that doesn't add value to the customer? Part of it is more operational. All the tasks and things that we ask our employees to do that are not needed. So first take those out. Along with taking those out, make sure that you pay enough, you hire the right people so that the skill level of each person is the same and people are able to do a good job and they are motivated to do a good job. So I would first focus on removing work and investing in people to be able to operate with Slack before adding labor hours.
Okay. And then, this may be a related question from the audience. What are your thoughts about job crafting to create better jobs? So, changing people's, job descriptions, mixing things up more.
Yeah, mixing things up. So almost, well, all of the companies that I've studied that are able to create good jobs do cross training. So their employees are able to do multiple tasks, right? And variety of tasks. And that task variety, we know from literature, is first motivating. Because it enables people to shift between tasks and it makes the work more meaningful. It also creates higher productivity and it also enables much higher service because you can respond to customer needs so much better. In the frontline settings that I study, the crafting in terms of I'm going to decide, I'm going to figure out what's best is oftentimes a little bit harder to do than perhaps in headquarter type of positions.
And we have room for one last question, and that is, where do leaders who are encountering resistance in attempting to, create an organization, a good jobs organization, where do they encounter the most resistance? And we're wondering, is that more commonly found among publicly held companies?
There are more private companies that pursue good jobs than public companies, because especially public company leaders who are not founders, who are professional managers, are under tremendous pressure from their investors. But I think the investors are actually a lot more open to this than they may think. There are a wide range of investors, from long-term versus short-term investors. And I think the resistance is the lack of courage, lack of courage to take the steps. And a final part is sometimes people are overwhelmed because they say, okay, I need to do so many different changes. And to be able to do these changes, I need to prioritize this effort. But there are other things that I could do that can improve sales or reduce costs that could be faster. So if they don't have a compelling reason to pursue this, it's very challenging to do. And when we work with companies, we say, don't do this to create good jobs. Do this to win with your customers. Because in order to prioritize this effort, you have to make it about winning with your customers, competitive, or you have to make it about morals, that we can't live our values if 40% of our frontliners are on Medicaid and they can't afford our benefits or they can't put food on the table.
Right, absolutely. Well, thank you. This has been tremendous, really important work. And I think that it's, although a lot of companies are encountering difficulties lately with hiring, this does really put a spotlight on the issues that I know you've been working on for many years. So thank you so much for being with us today, Zainab. Really pleased.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, thank you. So in our last session for this event, we'll look at a set of critical practices for developing talent in the organization: coaching, mentoring, and sponsorship, and how to lead these efforts in the virtual workplace. Curtis Odom is an executive professor at Northeastern University's Damore McKim School of Business. He has over 20 years of international business experience with Fortune 100 companies in a range of industries. His consulting practice focuses on M&A post-merger integration, enterprise change management, and organizational effectiveness. Welcome, Curtis.
Pleasure to be with you and everyone here today. So I'd like to spend some time, if we could, just having a conversation, if you will, about exactly what is on the minds of many. And what I would share very specifically is this idea of thinking about how do we both understand and know the differences between coaching, mentoring, and sponsorship, and then taking that to the next level. How do you do that in this now virtual office? Certainly all of us have gone from all in the office to all remote to now some hybrid and everything in the middle, I'd like to say. So I'd like to spend some time just kind of sharing some thoughts, giving you some things that you could use, some takeaways, and maybe even availing you of some ahas as you go about the practice of coaching, mentoring, and sponsorship, not only for your people or those that work with you, but also for yourself. So, as you know, for the past 20 plus months, we've all been working harder than ever before. We just might have been doing it at different places. So I took the opportunity to have a little fun with you, as you see here. And I'm sharing with you where I think many of us in our mind have been working for the time of the pandemic. We've been working diligently, probably harder than ever before, but we've been doing it remotely. We've been doing it at the beach. We've been doing it in coffee shops. We've been doing it at our dining rooms slash kitchen slash office table meeting place in our house, whatever you want to call it. But we've been working, and we've been working from a standpoint of how do we turn in our absolute best while giving our best, realizing that the lines between home and work have blurred. Well, in that space, while we've been working, many have said to me in executive coaching conversations or just passing that they haven't done a lot of coaching, mentoring, and sponsoring of their people, nor have they felt like anyone has taken the opportunity to coach them around specific tasks, haven't mentored them around behaviors, and may not have thought about how to sponsor them en route to different levels in their career. And when you think about that from a leadership perspective, that's really the most important pieces of our job. There's always a mix between leading people, managing tasks and priorities, and then doing the work that actually needs to get done. But in that space, there's also the thinking about how do we continue to grow, add strength to strength, and really set ourselves up to do our absolute best, but do it in a way that fits with our own values, our own personal aspirations, and takes into account the fact that the pandemic threw everybody for a loop. I mean, really, how could anybody plan for or prepare for when the world shuts down? So here's the overarching question of today. That pause was deliberate because I wanted to give you an opportunity to read the question, but I've highlighted two words: unique challenges. I don't believe that they're insurmountable. I don't believe that they're impossible. They're just unique based upon the time, based upon all that's going on. So, what I wanted to get into is thinking of this. If you think back to the way that leading and leadership were done pre pandemic, I think every one of us can agree that things are very different now. Leadership is different, leading is different, and the expectations of the workforce of leaders is now also different. Part of my opportunity to be both a consultant as well as an executive professor at Northeastern is the fact that I get a chance every semester to interact with, coach, mentor, sponsor, learn from, and teach at least 80 new entrants into the workforce. And what I am humbled to learn every semester is exactly what they are expecting of the workforce that they're getting ready to walk out into. More specifically, what they are expecting of the leaders that they will be working with and for when they meet them in the office. And I'll tell you, as someone who's spent time as an executive and who's led teams of people across my careers, plural, between the military and being in corporate and certainly being a business owner for 10 years, what I will tell you is that what they're expecting of us is different, and many of us are going to be caught unaware. So dive into that a little bit more. When you think about how you came into the workforce as a leader, or maybe you're a high level, high functioning senior individual contributor, when you think about how you came into your career, it's probably very different than what you're being asked to do or expected to do now in a leadership role for this modern workforce. And it's confusing and it's difficult. And dare I say, in conversations I just had as recent as last evening, many leaders are saying to themselves, why can't I get this right? Why isn't anybody telling me specifically what's being asked of me? Why isn't anybody just coming right out and say, hey, I need you to coach me, I need you to sponsor me, what have you? And there are many different reasons for that. Some meaning that maybe the workforce doesn't know the difference between those two things or three, or they don't feel like they should ask you. They feel like you're supposed to know that this is your job. that this is what you're supposed to do. And many times, not the fault of anybody, we find ourselves in leadership roles without leadership skills. And the leadership skills that are missing right now are based upon empathy, they're based upon emotional intelligence, they're based upon meeting people where they are, not meeting them where you are. So as you see this graphic behind you, this poor person is standing there scratching their head trying to figure out, okay, I don't know if I know what I'm looking at, but I know I need to do something about what I'm seeing. So if you fast forward into that, we're all coming to this place with the rise in attention finally being paid to the whole person, to emotional and mental well-being, to the idea that many of us have been working harder and longer, fewer resources. We've seen colleagues be furloughed or let go. We're trying to juggle our, potentially we have parents at home who need our help right now. Potentially we have children at home who need our help. Maybe we're finding ourselves at age 49, speaking from my own experience, trying to wrestle with algebra again while trying to lead a meeting with clients on the other side of the globe. And what you find, not unlike what you see here in this graphic, is you're finding yourselves at a crossroads. How do I get the assistance that I need while giving the guidance that people are expecting? How do I get the tips that'll help me support others? And where do I go to for advice when everybody seems to be asking me for my help? Confusing times, not unsurmountable, just unique. So let's have a little fun if we think about it. I chose this because I'm a big Seinfeld fan. Well, at least my wife is, and now she is rubbed off on me because we watch all of these reruns. And when you see here this idea of no sponsorship for you, I chose this for a very specific reason. Many of us who are in our roles that we're in right now, we got here because someone coached, mentored, or sponsored us. But the idea of sponsorship is something that many people have heard of, but probably wouldn't be able to pick it out of a lineup. The idea of sponsorship is to take an interest in someone from the standpoint of wanting to see them grow their career to the next level. When I think about sponsorship, it's very much akin to advocacy for me. And I think about that in the workforce where people of color and women need not only coaches, mentors, and sponsors, we also need advocates. And my definition of advocate is someone who is in a position of influence in an organization, who is around and part of conversations that you're not privy to, that will say key things about your ability at a moment of incident or at a moment of opportunity. So when you think about sponsorship, that to me is someone who has gotten to a level in their career, maybe within an organization, and now are literally willing to carve off a piece of their brand and hand it to you so that you can use that brand, that good fortune to open doors that maybe were invisible to you before. And I think that's an important thing to think about all the way through. And if you now know what sponsorship is, you get a chance to ask yourself, have I ever been sponsored? Or do I even know? Or if you're in this position now where you have seen someone who's come up in the organization, you've taken an interest into the way that they do their work or the way they present themselves, maybe, dare I say, you see a little bit of yourselves in that person. Well, now it's time to think about that idea of how do I go about paying it forward? How do I sponsor someone? But before we do that a little bit differently, or should I say a little more depth, let's define that. And what I hear often talked about and what I hear often said is these three words being used interchangeably. So I thought we would have conversation before Q&A to kind of get into the idea of what does it really look like for each one of these. So I'm going to put something on the screen. I'm going to give you a few moments to let your eyes wash over it and read it, because I think that it's important that before we go forward, you know exactly where I'm coming from and which can now be where you start to come from. Take a look at these three columns in front of you. As your eyes wash over each one of the columns, I'll ask you to walk with me as I go through and just talk about each one of the three as we do. Notice how coaching, mentoring, and sponsorship have a different timeline. I won't read to you because you can do that for yourself. But notice the difference in the timeline. Notice what drives each one of these. Look at who it could be. Look at what's asked of the person who's in the role of coach or in mentor and sponsor. Look who the onus or the responsibility it's on to keep the relationship going. And for me, that was one of the greatest learnings I had not so very long ago, is you go into these relationships thinking that maybe the other person's driving all of it. Maybe you don't realize that it is a partnership that you're building. Or maybe you're sitting around waiting for someone to tap you gently on the shoulder and assume one of these roles for you. Well, now by sharing this with you, I hope you see that maybe that works, but in all likelihood, there's more work required on our part to make it happen. Notice who's involved in the selection, and then finally, take a look at the big word of the day on this slide, if you will, the connection. None of this, the three of these, don't happen without connection. Long ago, I had the opportunity to serve in the United States Navy and did so proudly and would do it again today. And one of the things that I learned over my 10 years on active duty coming up on Veterans Day is the fact that leadership is about connecting with people. That if you cannot connect with people, you can't lead. So when I think about the aspect of leadership, and even though it's different now and leading is different, the one thing that has not changed, and I really don't believe it ever will, is the fact that you have to have a connection with those that you're leading, as well as a connection with those that you're following. And I wanted to put that here last for each one of these three very deliberately, not because it's the last thing that came to mind, but because I want to really drive that point home, is that the connection is what matters. Notice what you need to have there, a personal connection. Maybe you don't need one to coach someone. As an executive coach, I might be able to get along with someone, but I don't need to have this deep personal connection with them because I'm coaching to a task. I'm coaching to a goal. Quite frankly, not having a personal connection as an executive coach has actually paid me some dividends in the fact of I'm not too familiar with someone, or I'm not, too subjective. It allows me to remain objective and keep my objectivity. But notice when you work your way forward, you get into mentoring, personal connection is important because now I'm going to mentor someone to their behaviors. I'm going to mentor them to behaviors that are going to help them in their personal, their professional life. I'm going to mentor them toward behaviors that, if I'm part of a culture of an organization, behaviors that I've seen work, that if they were to exhibit these behaviors, it would make their path of, progression smoother, or maybe even make it a little bit faster, or in some instances, less steep of a climb. But finally, when I get to sponsorship, that personal connection is absolutely critical. Because as I said earlier, if I'm going to carve off a piece of my brand and hand it to somebody and let that turn into a talisman to get them places, what that means is wherever that person goes, so goes my brand. And if you're like me, you've spent decades working to build a brand. And we all know that you can spend decades building a brand and literally take seconds to ruin it. Our evening news, whichever channel you choose to watch, are filled every night with instances of people who had a brand that was now gone in 30 seconds. Frightening as that may be, it's real. So if you think back to what we're talking about today, the idea of having that brand drives sponsorship. And I think that's an important thing to think about, because as you're going to sponsor someone, ask yourself, are you really willing to go with that person, literally and figuratively, to the next stage of their career? So I wanted to give you something, as time is always of the essence. I wanted to give you something that you could use, and we'll open it up to Q&A. In this idea of the definition or the split between mentorship and sponsorship, take another look at this. Notice what you're being asked to do. What you're being charged to do. And then focus in on that last bullet, which I believe ties a bow on what I've said to this moment. In one instance, you're trying to focus on your mentee's personal professional development. And then the last bullet, you want to fight to get their people promoted. Now, when I say their people, that doesn't necessarily mean people in your organization, like your team. It could be in the organization proper. So that being said, like many who have spoken here yesterday and today, we've had the opportunity to write for different online publications. I have had the great pleasure to write for Sloan Management Review. And I'll pull from something from an article that I had written with my co-author, Charn McAllister. And we had written an article, as you see there in the bottom of the screen, entitled Getting Representative Sponsorship Right in Your Organization. And we're excited to have published this because it was our first opportunity to be published in SMR. And thank you again to the team that allowed us to be able to share our thinking with so many. But from that article, what you see here is this graphic. Take a read of this, and then I'll explain it a little bit more in depth. What you're seeing here is what I believe is important for both sides of the mentorship and the sponsorship conversation, equation, relationship. Many times as a leader, I have wondered if someone was really interested in being mentored, if they were really interested in being sponsored to the next level of their career. And in thinking about that, both myself and Charn, we had many conversations that led to the article, but we landed on creating this tool that if someone is really both ready to be mentored and sponsored, or if you're ready to be a mentor or a sponsor, you should come at it from, opposite sides of the same table. And what we came up with is that if someone is really in that position, ready to move on, move up, and grow, there should be instances where they have demonstrated and expressed their ability to perform at the next level, their aspiration to be at the next level, and their engagement with the opportunity that is to get to that next level. So if you think about this, if you're on the side of wanting to be mentored or sponsored, ask yourself the question, have I demonstrated to my leader, and I say my leader because that is the most important relationship you can have in an organization, is the one with your leader. Have I demonstrated my ability to perform at the next level, or have I only demonstrated my mastery of the work that I'm doing today? That's not enough to get you to the next level. Sorry to tell you that, but it's true. Have you demonstrated your ability to perform at the next level? Have you talked about it? Have you out loud aspired to be the next level, whatever that is? Maybe it's not a vertical, maybe it's a horizontal, maybe it's a stretch, maybe it's more growth. Have you demonstrated your engagement? And on the other side of that, have you expressed it? Have you talked about it? Have you talked about your ability to perform at the next level? Have you talked about how much you aspire to it? And finally, have you talked about how engaged you are in that space? There's never enough time, my friends, but I will say that hopefully in the time that I have shared with you, before I get the chance to have Q&A with Elizabeth, I hope this has been helpful and gives you something to think about. Elizabeth?
Hey, thank you so much, Curtis. Really appreciate your time and your presentation. Just to jump off on something that you had said at the end as we were talking about, looking at both sides of the equation, the relationship. High potential employees may have much higher levels of demonstrated ability and aspiration and engagement than expressed levels of those qualities. And I'm thinking that maybe especially so if it reflects sort of cultural conditioning or personality traits rather than their ambition. So what's the best way forward in those situations so you don't overlook some of those people who kind of hide their light under a bushel?
Absolutely. One of the things that I learned and practiced is that in those conversations, your performance conversations with your direct reports, or you're having it with your leader, that you save time to have a conversation about where am I now and where do I want to go next. And I, started to add that to my conversations. And admittedly, as a leader asking that question of my direct reports, the first time I asked it, they were a little bit skeptical to want to answer that because they thought I was setting them up. But what I did ask them over and over, said, listen, my job is to help you get to wherever you want to be, but it's your job to let me know where that is. And I think that is one of the best ways to have it. It comes back to good old fashioned dialogue, if you can believe it.
Exactly. Do you see any unique, from our audience, do you see any unique generational differences? Looking at, the usual boomers, millennials, Gen X, in their needs and expectations for coaching, mentoring, and sponsorship? And if so, what are the best practices for navigating those differences?
Great question. In my travels and in my experience, I have noticed that there is definitely an ask of leaders, what I've noticed is that those that have been in the workforce, a little bit longer, I'm a Gen Xer, and colleagues who are of our seasoned characteristic, we usually do not reach out and tell our leaders what we need from them. We expect that they're going to know.
Mhm.
More so with those that are of a generation just now entering, they have no problem with saying to their leader, hey, I'm expecting and hoping that we can have coaching conversations. I'm expecting you're going to mentor me. This is what I want to do in the next 5 years. And I'm hoping that you could be, someone that can help me make that happen. So what I've seen is that there is a willingness to engage in conversation by those that might be newer into the workforce, but it doesn't mean that there's any less of a desire to have those types of conversations by those that have been in the workforce for a while. It's just coming at it from a different direction.
Right. Okay. Another question from the audience. Someone would like to know, what are some effective ways of being a sponsor or mentor or coach in the virtual environment in particular? It's a
Great
little hard to
question.
make that personal connection.
Great question. I would say the most important thing, and I do this myself, is make the time to connect. More so than ever, people go from meeting to meeting to meeting. And now here in life on planet Zoom, there's no need to make a, transition from one side of the building or campus to another. So what I would say is just do the check-in sessions. And I know that kind of goes back to when the pandemic first started and people would kind of check in on one another. But have a meeting where the only thing on the agenda is to talk to someone about what it is that they see as next for themselves. The true development conversation where the only thing on the agenda is the person that you're talking to really listen to what they're thinking, what they're saying, what they're feeling. And I use this other tool that I love, and I like to throw that in there and have a stay interview with the person. If they're a high performer and they've been with your organization for a while and you've had the benefit of seeing them grow, and quite frankly, you can't even think about them not being with your organization, ask them why they've stayed. Ask them why they're still with the organization, and then listen, write it down, and keep doing that so that they stay. And just thinking about that, you do that with one, they'll tell two friends, and they'll tell two friends, and the high tide rises all boats.
Got it. Great. And I think we have time for one last question
Sure.
from the audience. This is, how important is seeking out a sponsor yourself to becoming an effective sponsor? Do emerging leaders juggle both having and being a sponsor simultaneously?
Great question. And the answer is yes. And what I will tell you is just from my own experience, when you maybe are a person of color or you are a woman in the workforce and you're in a leadership role, or you'd like to, as I like to say, a leader who happens to be a person of color, who happens to be female, when you're in that space, you end up being either intentionally or unintentionally a mentor and a sponsor to many. So what I would say is this, is that when people are looking for you to be their mentor or their sponsor, is to be selective with what that looks like, not from a standpoint of wanting to push people away, but to really understand what their expectations are of you. And then from the standpoint of you taking care of your own career and thinking about yourself as being talented, when you're looking for someone to mentor or sponsor you, be very specific about what the ask is. Because I think many of us fell into the trap long ago that thinking that one person could be our mentor for everything. Impossible. So look for those that can sponsor you for specifics, mentor you for specifics, and try to be that same way in your agreeing to mentor and sponsor others.
Got it. Well, and unfortunately, that's all we have time for. But I'm so grateful to you, Curtis, for being with us today, and I'm also glad that in having given you the last word, we're also leaving our audience with hopefully a little bit of inspiration to do some of this really important work in organizations as well.
I hope so. That inspiration is in short supply, so I hope we spread it well.
All right. Thank you so much, Curtis.
My pleasure. Thank you.
That is our final session for this event. There's so much here for leaders to think about and insights that we hope will help you as you navigate into the future of work.
It's been an amazing couple of days, and we convened this roster of really great thinkers to help all of you get started. There's no question that work will be very different 5 to 10 years from now, but it's the decisions and actions that we all take in 2022 that can lead to a better future that works better for everyone.
And I want to add that all of the issues that we've been covering over the last 2 days are evolving And here at MIT Sloan Management Review, we'll continue to bring you the latest thinking and advice on leading and inspiring and growing your workforce, and growing a workforce that is equipped to tackle tomorrow's challenges. We're committed to being your best source of powerful ideas that can make a real difference to your business.
Thank you to our event sponsor, WebEx by Cisco. We appreciate your support, and thank you all for coming.